The distant howl of a coyote echoed across the moonlit plains as Pearl Malone clutched her dying brother's hand, desperation etching lines around her young eyes. At 22, she never imagined she'd be bargaining with fate in this God-forsaken corner of Nebraska Territory, 1873, but typhoid fever waited for no one, and medicine in Scottsbluff was as scarce as rainfall in August. Pearl wiped her brother's brow with a damp cloth, her fingers trembling. Thomas was only 16, too young to be claimed by the fever that had already taken their parents just 3 months prior. The small farmhouse they'd inherited felt emptier by the day. "Hold on, Tommy," she whispered, her throat tight with unshed tears. "I'll get you that medicine, I promise." Pearl had already sold nearly everything of value: her mother's silver hairbrush, her father's pocket watch, even the good linens she'd been saving for her hope chest. But it wasn't enough. The medicine Thomas needed came at a steep price, and Dr. Wilson had made it clear he couldn't extend any more credit. "Miss Malone," he'd said that morning, his voice tinged with genuine regret, "I'd help if I could, but I've got to pay my suppliers. That quinine doesn't come cheap, and I've already given you what I can spare on credit." Pearl had nodded, numb with fear. "I understand, doctor, but without it, your brother won't last the week," he'd finished gently. "I'm sorry." Now, as Pearl smoothed Thomas's sweat-soaked hair from his forehead, she made her decision. She'd heard rumors of another way to secure medicine, a way that made her cheeks burn with shame, but seemed the only path forward. "I'll be back soon," she promised, pressing a kiss to her brother's feverish brow. Outside, the late September air held the first hint of autumn's chill. Pearl pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and began the walk into town. The main street of Scottsbluff was quiet at this hour, with only the saloon showing signs of life. Light spilled from its windows, along with raucous laughter and piano music. Pearl hesitated at the swinging doors. Ladies of good standing didn't enter saloons, but desperate times called for desperate measures. She took a deep breath and pushed through. The stench of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies assaulted her senses. The piano player faltered mid-tune as conversations died away. All eyes turned to her dusty cowboys, card players, and the bartender with his rolled-up sleeves. "Well, what have we here?" a voice drawled from a dark corner. Pearl recognized him immediately: Silas Thornton, the town's wealthy businessman who owned the mercantile, the bank, and half the land around Scottsbluff. He was also rumored to have connections that brought in supplies others couldn't get, including medicine. "Mr. Thornton," Pearl said, forcing strength into her voice despite the trembling in her knees. "Might I have a word?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Miss Malone. Join me." She crossed the room with as much dignity as she could muster, aware of the whispers following her. Thornton pulled out a chair and Pearl sat, her back ramrod straight. "What brings such a lovely young lady into my establishment this evening?" he asked, pouring amber liquid into a glass. "My brother is dying," she said bluntly. "I need medicine. Quinine specifically?" "Ah." Thornton nodded slowly. "Dr. Wilson's supplies have run short again, I take it. He can't extend any more credit. And you've come to me." He studied her for a long moment. "I might be able to help you, Miss Malone. I have connections, as you know." Pearl's hands tightened in her lap. "What would it cost?" Thornton's smile widened. "Just a kiss, for now." Pearl blinked, surprised. "A kiss, to start with." He leaned forward. "One kiss for one dose. Your brother needs daily treatment for at least 2 weeks to recover, I'd wager." The implication was clear. Pearl swallowed hard. "And if I refuse?" "Then I wish you and your brother the best of luck." Thornton leaned back, taking a sip of his whiskey. "It's entirely your choice, Miss Malone." Pearl closed her eyes briefly. For Thomas, she would do anything. "One kiss, one dose. I'll return tomorrow." "Excellent." Thornton's voice was smooth as silk. "Meet me at the mercantile after closing. 7 o'clock. Pearl nodded stiffly and rose. As she turned to leave, a tall figure blocked her path, a man she'd never seen before. He wore a dusty black coat and a worn hat pulled low, but she could see his eyes, green as summer grass and just as cool. "Excuse me," she murmured, trying to step around him. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat as he moved aside. Outside, Pearl gulped the fresh air, her heart hammering in her chest. One kiss. She could manage that. For Thomas, she could manage anything, but 14 days of Thornton's kisses. She shuddered, knowing full well where such an arrangement would lead. As Pearl hurried home through the darkening streets, she didn't notice the tall stranger watching her from the saloon doorway, his expression thoughtful beneath the shadow of his hat. The next evening, Pearl stood outside Thornton's mercantile as the last customers filtered out. The shopkeeper's assistant, a thin man named Perkins, eyed her suspiciously as he locked the front door. "Mr. Thornton's expecting me," Pearl said quietly. Perkins sniffed. "Round back." Pearl made her way to the rear entrance, each step feeling heavier than the last. Thornton was waiting, a small glass bottle in his hand. "Right on time," he said, smiling. "I admire punctuality in a woman." "The medicine," Pearl said, extending her hand. Thornton held the bottle just out of reach. "Our arrangement first, Miss Malone." Pearl steeled herself as Thornton stepped closer, his free hand coming up to touch her cheek. She closed her eyes, willing herself not to flinch as his lips pressed against hers, dry, insistent, tasting of tobacco and whiskey. When he finally pulled away, Pearl forced herself not to wipe her mouth. "Very nice," Thornton murmured, handing her the bottle. "Until tomorrow, Miss Malone." Pearl clutched the precious medicine and hurried away, unaware of the figure watching from the shadows of the alley. When she reached home, Thomas's condition had worsened. He barely stirred as she administered the medicine, mixing it with water as Dr. Wilson had instructed. "Please work," she whispered, stroking his hair. By morning, Thomas's fever had broken slightly. His eyes, when they opened, were clearer than they had been in days. "Pearl," he croaked. "I'm here," she said, relief flooding through her. "How do you feel?" "Terrible," he admitted with a weak smile, "but alive." Pearl's heart soared. The medicine was working, but her joy was tempered by the knowledge that tonight she would need to return to Thornton for another dose. As Pearl tended to the chickens later that morning, she was startled by the approach of a rider. She shaded her eyes against the sun, not recognizing the tall bay horse or its rider until he drew closer. It was the stranger from the saloon, his green eyes just as striking in daylight. Up close, she could see he was perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he wasn't smiling now. "Miss Malone," he asked, dismounting. Pearl nodded cautiously. "Can I help you?" "Grant McAllister," he introduced himself, removing his hat. "I'm new to Scottsbluff, bought the old Carson place west of town." Pearl had heard the Carson ranch had finally sold after sitting empty for 2 years. "What brings you here, Mr. McAllister?" "Neighborliness," he said simply. "And this?" He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "Medicine for your brother." Pearl stared at him in shock. "How did you—" "I overheard your conversation with Thornton." His voice hardened slightly. "And I saw your meeting last night." Heat rushed to Pearl's cheeks. "You were spying on me." "Not intentionally," McAllister replied. "I was heading to the livery when I saw you go behind the mercantile. Given Thornton's reputation, I was concerned." "My brother's illness is no concern of yours," Pearl said stiffly, embarrassment making her defensive. "Perhaps not," McAllister agreed. "But I've had dealings with men like Thornton before. They start with small demands that grow larger. Soon you're in deeper than you ever intended." Pearl's eyes dropped to the package in his hand. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." "My sister died of typhoid 3 years ago," he said quietly. "The nearest doctor was 2 days' ride away by the time I got back with medicine." He trailed off, the memory clearly still painful. "Take it, there's enough for 2 weeks' treatment." Pearl hesitated, torn between desperate need and pride. "I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment." "Then what do you want?" she asked, suspicious of such generosity from a stranger. McAllister placed the package in her hands. "Nothing. Consider it a welcome gift from a new neighbor." Before Pearl could respond, the sound of coughing came from inside the house. "I should check on Thomas," she said. McAllister nodded, replacing his hat. "If you need anything else, my place is just beyond Crow Creek. Any of the hands can point you in the right direction." As he mounted his horse, Pearl called after him, "Thank you, Mr. McAllister." He touched the brim of his hat, a small smile finally appearing. "Madam." Pearl watched him ride away, the package of medicine clutched to her chest like a treasure. She unwrapped it inside to find not only quinine but also other remedies: willow bark tea for fever, honey for cough, and a small bottle labeled Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup for pain and sleep. That evening, Pearl faced a decision. She should return Thornton's bottle and explain she no longer needed his help. But doing so might create an enemy, something a woman alone couldn't afford. Yet continuing the charade seemed dishonest. In the end, conscience won out. Pearl made her way to the mercantile at the appointed time, Thornton's bottle in her reticule. "Miss Malone," he greeted her, his smile predatory. "I've been looking forward to our arrangement all day." Pearl took a deep breath. "Mr. Thornton, I've come to return your medicine and cancel our arrangement." His smile vanished. "Is that so? Your brother's miraculously recovered overnight, has he?" "No, but I've found another source for the medicine he needs." Thornton's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Another source?" "In Scottsbluff, I think not. Nevertheless, I no longer require your assistance." Pearl held out the bottle. "Thank you for your help yesterday." Thornton ignored the bottle, stepping closer. "Our arrangement was for 14 days, Miss Malone." "We had an arrangement for 1 kiss, 1 dose," Pearl corrected, backing away. "I'm declining to renew it." Thornton grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "You ungrateful little, is there a problem here?" Pearl turned to find Grant McAllister standing a few paces away, his hand resting casually near the pistol at his hip. Thornton released Pearl's wrist immediately. "This is a private conversation, stranger." "Doesn't look like a conversation to me," McAllister said mildly, though his eyes were hard. "Miss Malone, are you ready to leave?" Pearl didn't hesitate. "Yes, Mr. McAllister." As she moved toward him, Thornton called after her, "This isn't over, Pearl. That medicine your brother needs. Good luck finding it anywhere in the territory once word gets out that I've been crossed." McAllister stepped between them. "Miss Malone is under my protection now, Thornton. I suggest you remember that." The businessman's face contorted with fury, but he made no move to follow as McAllister escorted Pearl away. "Thank you," Pearl said once they were out of earshot. "Again." "I figured you might try to return his medicine," McAllister explained. "Men like Thornton don't take rejection well." "I'm beginning to realize that." Pearl shivered despite the mild evening. "He threatened to prevent anyone from selling medicine to Thomas." "He can try," McAllister said grimly, "but I have connections of my own. Your brother won't go without." They walked in silence for a moment before Pearl asked, "Why are you helping us, Mr. McAllister? The truth this time." He sighed, looking up at the stars beginning to appear overhead. "When my sister was dying, I made her a promise that I'd never stand by if I could help someone in need. I failed her. I won't fail your brother." The simple honesty in his voice touched something in Pearl's heart. "You're a good man, Mr. McAllister." "Grant," he corrected gently. "If I'm to be your protector, we should be on a first-name basis, don't you think?" Pearl smiled, surprising herself. "Grant, then, and I'm Pearl." As they approached her farmhouse, lamplight glowing in the windows, Pearl felt a strange mixture of emotions. Fear of Thornton's revenge, gratitude for Grant's intervention, and something else, a flutter of awareness she hadn't felt in a long time. "Would you like to come in?" she asked impulsively. "Meet Thomas. I'm sure he'd want to thank you." Grant hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." Inside, Thomas was propped up against his pillows, looking marginally better than he had that morning. His eyes widened when Pearl entered with a stranger. "Thomas, this is Mr. Grant McAllister," Pearl introduced. "He's the one who provided the medicine." "Sir," Thomas said, his voice weak but respectful, "I'm in your debt." Grant shook his head. "No debt, son, just get well." As Pearl prepared tea, she watched Grant and Thomas talking. The cowboy had a gentle way about him, drawing Thomas out with questions about his interests and plans for the farm. By the time Grant rose to leave, Thomas was smiling more than he had in weeks. "I'll come by tomorrow to check on you," Grant promised at the door. "And Pearl, be careful, Thornton won't take this lightly." "I will," she assured him. "Thank you for everything." After he left, Pearl found Thomas watching her with knowing eyes. "What?" she asked. "He likes you," Thomas said simply. Pearl felt her cheeks warm. "Don't be silly, he's just being kind." "Kind men don't usually glare daggers at Silas Thornton unless they've got a personal stake," Thomas pointed out. "And he couldn't stop looking at you." "You need rest," Pearl deflected, adjusting his blankets. "The medicine is working, but you're not out of danger yet." Thomas caught her hand. "Pearl, what did you promise Thornton for that first dose?" Pearl looked away. "It doesn't matter now, it matters to me." His voice was stronger than it had been in days, determined. "What did he ask of you?" "Just a kiss," Pearl admitted reluctantly. "Nothing more happened." Thomas's face darkened with anger. "If I wasn't stuck in this bed, you'd do nothing," Pearl interrupted firmly. "Thornton is dangerous, and you're in no condition to confront him. Besides, Mr. McAllister Grant has made it clear I'm under his protection. And you trust him, a stranger." Pearl thought about Grant's eyes, the way they crinkled when he smiled at Thomas, the quiet strength in his voice when he confronted Thornton. "Yes," she said simply. "I trust him." The next morning, Pearl was collecting eggs when she heard horses approaching, not one but several. She straightened, shading her eyes against the rising sun, and felt a chill run through her. Thornton was leading 3 men toward the farmhouse. Pearl hurried inside, her heart pounding. "Thomas," she whispered urgently, "stay quiet." She took down her father's shotgun from above the fireplace, checking that it was loaded before positioning herself on the porch. She might be a woman alone, but she wouldn't be intimidated on her own property. "That's far enough," she called as Thornton and his men approached. Thornton reined in his horse, smirking. "Now, Pearl, is that any way to greet a visitor? State your business and leave, Mr. Thornton." "I've come to collect what's owed me," he said, his voice hardening. "1 kiss for 1 dose, remember. Except now I think the price has gone up, considering the trouble you've caused." "I owe you nothing," Pearl replied, her finger steady on the trigger. "Please leave." Thornton nodded to one of his men, who dismounted and started toward the porch. Pearl raised the shotgun higher. "I won't warn you again." The man hesitated, looking back at Thornton, who scowled. "She won't shoot." "Are you willing to bet your life on that?" came a voice from behind them. Grant McAllister sat atop his bay horse, rifle resting across his saddle. Behind him rode 4 men, all armed and grim-faced. "McAllister," Thornton spat. "This doesn't concern you." "Threatening a woman on her own land concerns every decent man," Grant replied evenly. "Miss Malone asked you to leave. I suggest you do so." For a tense moment, Pearl thought Thornton might order his men to fight, but after assessing the odds, he turned his horse sharply. "This isn't over," he promised, glaring at Pearl and Grant in turn. "Nobody crosses Silas Thornton without consequences." As Thornton and his men rode away, Pearl lowered the shotgun with trembling hands. Grant dismounted and came to her side. "Are you all right?" she nodded, not trusting her voice. "This is Frank, Miguel, and the Dallan brothers, Jim and Pete," Grant introduced his men. "They work my ranch." The cowboys tipped their hats respectfully. "Boss thought you might need some extra hands around the place for a spell," Frank explained. "At least until your brother's back on his feet." Pearl looked at Grant in surprise. "You're leaving your men here, if that's acceptable," he said. "They can help with the farm work and keep an eye out for Thornton. Jim and Pete will stay tonight and we'll rotate shifts." Pearl was overwhelmed by the gesture. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need," Grant assured her. "Neighbors help each other out here. That's how we survive." Over the next 2 weeks, Thomas steadily improved under the regular doses of medicine. The McAllister hands proved invaluable, repairing the sagging barn roof, mending fences, and bringing in the last of the harvest that Pearl had feared would rot in the fields. Grant himself came daily, sometimes bringing supplies from town, other times just checking on Thomas's progress. Pearl found herself looking forward to his visits more than she cared to admit. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Pearl finally asked the question that had been on her mind. "Why did you really come to Scottsbluff, Grant? It can't just be for the Carson Ranch." Grant was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the horizon where the sky blazed orange and pink. "I was a lawman before," he finally said. "Marshal in a small town in Colorado, lost my wife and daughter in a fire 5 years ago while I was away tracking outlaws." Pearl's heart ached for him. "I'm so sorry," he nodded, accepting her sympathy. "After that, the badge didn't mean much anymore. I drifted, took odd jobs, then my uncle died and left me some money, enough to buy a ranch and start over. And you chose Scottsbluff." "I wanted somewhere quiet," he admitted with a small smile. "Though it hasn't exactly worked out that way," Pearl laughed softly. No, I suppose not. Their eyes met in the fading light, and Pearl felt that flutter again, stronger now. Grant's gaze dropped to her lips briefly before he looked away. It's getting late, he said, rising. I should head back. Pearl stood too, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. Will you come tomorrow? Wild horses couldn't keep me away, he promised, his voice gentle. As the days passed, Thomas grew strong enough to leave his bed for short periods. The color returned to his cheeks and his appetite improved dramatically. He's young, Dr. Wilson commented during a visit. He'll make a full recovery. You're a lucky young man, Thomas. Not lucky, Thomas corrected, glancing at Pearl and Grant, who stood nearby. Blessed with a sister who would do anything for me and friends who came through when we needed them most. Pearl blinked back tears, squeezing her brother's hand. As autumn deepened toward winter, Thornton made no further direct moves against them, though Pearl often felt eyes watching her in town. Grant's men continued their rotation at the farm, becoming like family. One crisp November morning, Grant arrived with a wagon instead of on horseback. I thought we might go on a picnic, he suggested. Thomas is well enough to be left alone for a few hours, and it's probably the last warm day we'll have before winter sets in. Pearl hesitated, looking back at the house. Go on, Thomas urged from the doorway. I'm not a child, and Miguel is here if I need anything. With Thomas's blessing, Pearl climbed into the wagon beside Grant. He drove them to a pretty spot by Crow Creek, where cottonwoods created a sheltered area perfect for a picnic. As they spread a blanket and unpacked the basket, Grant had brought cold chicken, biscuits, apple tarts, and a bottle of cider. Pearl found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't since before her parents' deaths. This is lovely, she said, gazing at the water sparkling in the sunlight. Thank you for bringing me here. I've been wanting to show you my favorite spot, Grant replied, pouring cider into 2 cups. I come here sometimes just to think. And what do you think about? Pearl asked, accepting the cup from him, their fingers brushing. Grant's eyes met hers, serious now. Lately, mostly you. Pearl's heart skipped a beat. Me, you, he confirmed. Your courage, your devotion to your brother. The way your eyes light up when you laugh. Grant, she murmured, not sure what to say. He set his cup down and took her hand. Pearl, I know we haven't known each other long, but these past weeks, I've come to care for you, deeply. Pearl squeezed his hand, emotion welling in her throat. I care for you too. I should court you properly, he said, smiling. Ask Thomas's permission. Take you to church socials and town dances. Pearl laughed softly. We seem to have done everything backward, haven't we? You've already seen me at my worst, desperate, frightened, trading kisses for medicine. Grant's expression darkened slightly at the reminder of Thornton. You did what you had to do to save your brother. There's no shame in that. No, Pearl agreed. But I'm glad you came along when you did, not just for the medicine, but for everything after. Grant reached out, his fingertips gently brushing her cheek. May I kiss you, Pearl? Not as payment for anything, just because I want to more than I've wanted anything in a long time. In answer, Pearl leaned forward, closing the distance between them. His lips were warm and gentle against hers, his hand coming up to cradle the back of her head. Unlike Thornton's forced kiss, this one made her feel cherished, protected, desired. When they finally broke apart, Grant rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you in that saloon. Pearl smiled, her heart full. I've been wanting you to. They spent the afternoon by the creek, talking about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Grant spoke of his years as a marshal, the hardships and satisfactions of the job. Pearl shared stories of her parents, of growing up on the farm, of her hopes to see it thrive again. Thomas wants to go to school in Omaha next fall, she told him. He's always been smart, always wanted more than farm life. I want to make that possible for him. And what about you? Grant asked. What do you want for yourself? Pearl considered the question seriously. I want a home, she said finally. Family, security. For so long I've just been focused on surviving, but now, Grant prompted when she trailed off. Pearl looked at him, allowing herself to imagine a future that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Now I think I might want more. As the sun began to set, Grant reluctantly packed up the picnic. I should get you home before Thomas worries. On the drive back, Pearl rested her head against Grant's shoulder, a contentment she hadn't felt in years spreading through her. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Thornton's vengeance, the hard winter to come, the uncertainty of the farm's future, she no longer faced them alone. Thomas was waiting on the porch when they returned, a knowing smile on his face as he observed Pearl's flushed cheeks and Grant's protective arm around her waist. "Have a nice picnic?" he asked innocently. Pearl shot him a warning look, but Grant merely laughed. "Thomas, I wonder if I might have a word with you, man to man." Thomas straightened, suddenly serious. "Of course." Pearl watched as the two most important men in her life walked a short distance away, speaking earnestly. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw Thomas nod solemnly, then break into a grin before shaking Grant's hand vigorously. When they returned, Thomas embraced her tightly. "He's a good man, Pearl," he whispered in her ear. "I couldn't ask for a better brother-in-law, brother-in-law." Pearl repeated, looking at Grant questioningly. Grant took her hands in his. "I asked Thomas for his blessing to court you properly, with the intention of marriage if you'll have me. If I'll have you." Pearl's voice caught on a laugh that was half sob. "Grant McAllister, I'd be a fool to refuse." The courtship that followed was swift but proper. Grant called on Pearl every Sunday after church, brought her small gifts, a ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry, wildflower honey from his ranch. They attended the harvest festival together, and Pearl found herself welcomed by the community as Grant McAllister's girl. Thornton, meanwhile, seemed to have accepted defeat. He avoided Pearl when their paths crossed in town and made no further threats. Some whispered that Grant's reputation as a former marshal had convinced Thornton to back down. Others suggested that Grant had made certain arrangements with the territorial authorities regarding Thornton's business practices. Whatever the reason, Pearl was grateful for the peace. As winter settled over Scottsbluff, bringing snow and bitter cold, she found joy in the simple rhythm of life. Thomas grew stronger each day, devouring the books Grant brought him and making plans for his education. The farm, with help from Grant's men, was in better shape than it had been in years. And Pearl found herself falling deeper in love with the quiet cowboy who had saved not just her brother's life, but her own future. On Christmas Eve, Grant came to dinner bearing gifts and a sprig of mistletoe, which he mischievously held over Pearl's head at every opportunity, much to Thomas's amusement. After the meal, as they sat before the fire, Grant cleared his throat nervously. "I have one more gift," he said, reaching into his pocket. Pearl gasped as he dropped to one knee before her, opening a small box to reveal a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "Pearl Malone," Grant said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I came to Scottsbluff looking for peace and a fresh start. I never expected to find love. You are the bravest, strongest woman I've ever known. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Pearl's vision as she nodded. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Grant." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then kissed her deeply as Thomas cheered and clapped. They were married on a bright January day in 1874 in the small white church in Scottsbluff. Pearl wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her slender frame, and carried winter holly and dried wildflowers. Thomas, now fully recovered, proudly escorted his sister down the aisle. Grant waited at the altar, tall and handsome in a new suit, his green eyes shining with love as Pearl approached. The entire community turned out for the ceremony. Grant's ranch hands, the shopkeepers who had come to admire Pearl's resilience, even Dr. Wilson, who had played an unwitting role in bringing them together. "I, Grant, take thee, Pearl," he vowed, his voice carrying clear and true through the church, "to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Pearl repeated the vows through happy tears, remembering the desperate woman she had been just months before, willing to trade kisses for medicine. How strange and wonderful that fate had led her to this moment, to this man who offered not just medicine, but a lifetime of love and security. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the town hall, where tables groaned with food contributed by neighbors and friends. As Pearl and Grant shared their first dance as husband and wife, she caught sight of a familiar figure slipping out the door. Silas Thornton, his face unreadable. He nodded once in her direction, a gesture that might have been respect, before disappearing into the night. "Everything all right," Grant murmured, following her gaze. Pearl smiled up at him, putting thoughts of Thornton firmly behind her. "Everything is perfect." That night, Grant brought Pearl home to the Carson Ranch, now the McAllister Ranch, where he had prepared the master bedroom with fresh linens, candles, and winter roses. As husband and wife, they discovered each other slowly, tenderly, their passion tempered by deep affection and mutual respect. "I love you, Mrs. McAllister," Grant whispered as they lay entwined, the moonlight casting silver patterns through the window. "And I love you," Pearl replied, marveling at how far she had come from that desperate night in the saloon. "My cowboy with a lifetime supply of medicine." Grant chuckled, kissing her forehead. "And kisses, don't forget the kisses." "I could never forget those," she promised, sealing her words with another kiss. Spring brought new beginnings. Thomas left for school in Omaha, his tuition paid from the profits of the winter cattle sale. Pearl discovered she was expecting their first child, due in late autumn. And Grant expanded the ranch, buying adjacent land that had once belonged to Thornton, who had decided to sell his holdings and move to California. "No more looking over our shoulders," Grant said as they stood on their porch, watching the sunset over land that was now all theirs. His hand rested protectively on Pearl's growing belly. "Our child will grow up in peace." "Children," Pearl corrected with a smile. "I have a feeling there will be more than one." Grant's face lit up at the prospect. "A whole brood of little McAllisters running around. I'd like nothing better." As summer turned to fall, Pearl's time drew near. Grant became increasingly protective, rarely letting her out of his sight. When her labor began on a crisp October morning, he sent riders in all directions, one to fetch the midwife, another to telegraph Thomas, and a third to bring Dr. Wilson, just in case. After 12 hours of labor, Pearl gave birth to a healthy son with his father's green eyes and a strong set of lungs. "James Thomas McAllister," Pearl declared, cradling her newborn as Grant sat beside them on the bed, his face awestruck. "He's perfect," Grant whispered, gently touching his son's tiny hand. "Just like his mother." 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Catherine Pearl, with her mother's golden hair and stubborn chin. Thomas, now studying law, came home for the christening, bringing books and toys for his niece and nephew. "You've built something beautiful here," he told Pearl as they watched Grant teaching little James to ride his first pony, Catherine secure in her father's other arm. Pearl squeezed her brother's hand. "We built it together," she corrected. "All of us." As the years passed, the McAllister Ranch prospered. Grant's reputation for fair dealing and quality stock spread throughout the territory. Pearl became known for her garden and her hospitality, hosting neighbors and travelers with equal warmth. 2 more children joined the family, Robert in 1878 and Elizabeth in 1880. Thomas, now a successful lawyer in Omaha, visited regularly, bringing news of the expanding nation and gifts for his growing brood of nieces and nephews. One evening in 1890, as Pearl and Grant sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Pearl found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. "Do you ever think about how we met?" she asked, leaning against Grant's shoulder. "Often," he admitted, his arm tightening around her. "I thank God every day that I walked into that saloon when I did," Pearl smiled. "Thomas was so sick, I was so desperate, I would have done anything to save him." "I know," Grant said softly. "That's what made me fall in love with you from the start, your courage, your devotion. And here we are, 16 years later." Grant turned to face her, his green eyes still as vibrant as the day they met, though now lined with the evidence of years of laughter and prairie sun. "Do you have any regrets, Pearl, about marrying a dusty cowboy who interfered in your business?" Pearl laughed, reaching up to touch his face, now sporting a neatly trimmed beard shot with silver. "Not a single one. You didn't just give me medicine, Grant. You gave me a lifetime of love, security, family, everything I ever wanted." "And you," he replied, kissing her gently, "gave me a reason to live again when I thought that part of me had died with my first family. You and the children are my world, Pearl McAllister. From the yard came the sound of their children's laughter as James, now 16 and the image of his father, chased his younger siblings around the oak tree Grant had planted the year they were married. "We've been blessed," Pearl murmured. "Indeed we have," Grant agreed. And it all started with a desperate bargain and a lifetime supply of medicine. Pearl smiled at the memory, "The best trade I ever made." As the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Grant and Pearl McAllister sat hand in hand, surrounded by the life they had built together, a life that had begun with a kiss meant as payment but had blossomed into something far more precious. A love that healed not just the body but the soul.